Okay, Dr. Khadka, over to you. We can start now.
Okay, let's just wait for a minute if that's okay, because there's, I think, 12 participants. So let's see if a few people turn up. So give us just a minute more, Dr. Koirala and Apekshya, if that's okay. Thank you. I'm just trying to reach the number 20. Let's see if we can reach 20. So there you go. We are already 19. Okay, there you go. So can I start, Sama?
Yes, sure, you can start.
Thank you so much, Sama. So ladies and gentlemen, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, wherever you are. I'm actually currently in Kathmandu. So on behalf of the organizing committee for the IIDS webinar series on politics, economy, and public policy, we warmly welcome you to episode 21. The title of the talk today is Climate Volatility and Macroeconomic Impacts. The presenter today is Dr. Niraj Koirala, who is an assistant professor in economics at Cal State University. He's in fact starting his new job this month. So we're very fortunate to have Dr. Koirala with us. Dr. Koirala holds a Ph.D. in economics from Texas Tech University with a major focus on monetary economics, time series econometrics, and energy economics. Dr. Koirala also received his BSc and MSc degrees in agriculture science from Tribhuvan University, Nepal. Currently, Dr. Koirala's research focuses on uncertainty effects on the US economy. He has also worked with the IMF and the University of Texas A&M Investment Management Company as an economics researcher. His ongoing studies also include machine learning in electricity market in Texas, so quite impressive. He has published some of his works in energy economics and economics letters. Dr. Koirala is currently, in fact, writing a book on monetary policy in the context of Nepal. For those with similar research interest, I highly encourage you to reach out to Dr. Koirala. We have Ms. Apekshya Prasai as our discussant today, ladies and gentlemen. She is a PhD candidate in the political science department at the prestigious Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Her research interests include the role of women within militant movements and the impact of gender on militant ideology and strategy. Apekshya holds a BA in Government and Legal Studies from Bowdoin College. Apekshya has previously worked on a research project examining the impact of humanitarian cash transfers on women's economic empowerment post-2015 earthquake in Nepal. Some house rules, ladies and gentlemen, before we begin. Please mute your microphones when not speaking. Also, during the Q&A, please raise your hand if you want to speak, or you can type your questions in the chat box. If possible, please turn your video on when asking questions. And kindly do not interrupt other people or attempt to speak over them. Over to you, Dr. Koirala. Thank you so much.
Can I start now?
Yes, please go ahead, Dr. Koirala.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for inviting me for this presentation. Today I'm going to talk about my work, which is about climate volatility and macroeconomic impacts. Although macroeconomic means the big thing, but in this paper, I just focus on labor market and inside labor market, just employment. I focus on that. I'm Niraj Koirala, as Prabin has already described. I was previously working at Gettysburg College. Now I will join California State University. Sorry. The issue of relationship between climate and economic growth has been popular in economic literature. Although the empirical research has been, there has been a recent, it has been about only 20 or 30 years since literature started exploring empirical relationship between these two variables. However, the relationship was popular even in older days, like Montesquieu's The Spirit of Laws in 1750. He says that excess of heat made men slothful and dispirited. He meant that when there is high temperature, then productivity overall will go down. So the role of temperature on economy was a serious issue even in 17th or 16th century. It is argued that high temperatures have negative impacts on economic growth, and high climate fluctuation has higher negative impacts on poor economy rather than developing economy. And papers like that by Harun Mumtaz argue that especially lower income countries, they are more vulnerable to higher fluctuation in climate than the developed countries. Let me see the chat. So in my paper, I attempt to study whether temperature affects macroeconomic variable. In my case, they are employment in aggregate level and in sectoral level through volatility channel. For doing that, I use a bivariate Gart's 1-1 bar model. This is a recently developed model. In fact, it was developed in 2010 by Ilder and Serletis. In that paper, they constructed the time series of oil price uncertainty using this Gart's 1-1 bar model. I will explain detail about this model in a while. So far, relationship between temperature and aggregate economic activity has been quantified using two methods. One is macro method and another is micro method. So in macro method, the relationship has been examined using aggregate variable in countries. And some of the papers using using macro relation between climate and economic growth are by Sachs and Warner, Nordhaus, and Dale, Jens, and Olken in 2009. Although they study different dynamics of macroeconomics from climate perspective, however, they agree that increase in temperature might have adverse impact on macroeconomic of the country. These papers suggest that with 1 degree increase in temperature, on an average, there will be decrease in income by $1,600. Another approach is microanalysis. In microanalysis, they use integrated assessment model. This model is very complex in nature because they need to analyze in different strata and need to collect data in different levels. So that makes the issue more problematic. So in economics, most of the research have been focusing on macro analysis of climate and economics. Any question so far?
I think someone just requested if you could do a full screen, Dr. Koirala? Is that possible?
Okay.
Maybe Control L.
Control what?
Control L.
Control.
If this is, yeah, if you're using Beamer, then maybe Control L if this is a PDF. Control L.
Oh, it does not
Otherwise,
work.
don't worry. Yeah, yeah. Otherwise, don't worry.
Just give me a second.
Yeah, actual size, and I do Control L, but don't worry about it. Let's continue. Yeah,
Control
sorry
L?
about it.
No, it doesn't work.
No, no, please continue. Don't worry about that. I'm sorry.
The model that I use in this analysis is called as Garth-11 M-bar model. Let me explain briefly about this. The Garth M-bar model is expressed as equation 1, where this in this equation 1, YT is the variable, macroeconomic variable that I use for analysis. One variable is temperature, another variable is employment. And employment, they are in sectoral level and in total level. All of the data are from the US Federal Reserve, St. Louis. And this C is the coefficient of the variables of concern. And in this C, I assume C11 is equal to C22 is equal to 1. Moreover, I consider C1 to be equal to 0. I consider C1 to be equal to 0 so that increase in macroeconomic variable does not have contemporaneous effect on temperature. That means increase in macroeconomic variable like employment in my case will not have immediate impact on temperature. However, they are supposed to have impact after some time. This beta is the unconditional mean of these two variables, temperature and macroeconomic variables. And here we do have this, this one is, I think it's called Ohm. This Ohm is the coefficient of lag of dependent variables. Here we do have temperature and macroeconomic variables. They are the dependent variables. And the number of lags I use is n. Since I use the monthly data, so n will be equal to 12. And this B is the coefficient of volatility of temperature and macroeconomic variable represented by AT, which is given by A11T, A22T. And in the previous slide, epsilon T is serially uncorrelated shocks to temperature and economic variables. And epsilon T follows according to epsilon T is equal to AT to the power 1/2 XT, where AT is the time varying variance covariance of epsilon and XT is the normalized unit shock. Following Engel and Kroner, 1995, a functional form for AT is formulated as a bivariate Garth-11 as follows, which is according to equation 2. AT is equal to H plus psi epsilon T minus 1 squared plus psi AT minus 1. Here, H is unconditional constant mean of the variances. Psi is the coefficient capturing the impact of past shocks on current variances. and this psi shows the relationship between past variances and present variances. So my paper estimates this equation too using the maximum likelihood approach. Let me talk briefly about data and sources. I collected the data of temperature from the PRISM project of the University of Oregon. And the economic variables include GDP, industrial production index, and the name of that data on Federal Reserve St. Louis is INDPRO. If you type that in Federal Reserve St. Louis, you will find the data. And another variable is total employment, that is under the name PAYEMS. Data are collected from 1939 January to 2021 December. Any questions so far? So this is the time series of the variable that I use to fit the model. So in figure A, I saw that the variable, the temperature in label from throughout the sample period. And in B, you can see the industrial production index. Since this is the VAR model, we do not use label variables. So I log difference the data before fitting in the model. So in figure C, you can see the log difference data. And in D, you can see the GDP growth. So in the model, I use the data from figure C and D to estimate the impact of temperature volatility on US economy. Now the question might come, why should I use this GARS 11M VAR model over a standard homoscedastic VAR model? Since the work of since the 1980s, VAR has been a workhorse for macroeconomic analysis. Since the work of Christopher Sims, this GARS VAR model is just developed in 2010. Now you might be wondering, why should I use this GARS VAR model? So one criteria to classify model, whether a model is good or bad for doing any analysis, is to go over different criteria. One of the criteria is Schwarz information criteria. In another word, we call that is Bayesian information criteria. Other information criteria include Akaike information criteria. In this paper, I just use Bayesian information criteria. And if we compare two models, the model with the lowest value of information criteria will be chosen as the best model to proceed with the analysis. Here, I do different analysis with different variable, and I compare the Schwarz information criteria of different models. And in all the model, I find that this VAR model with heteroscedasticity, in another word, GARS and 11M VAR model, gives the lowest value of Schwarz information criteria. So according to convention, so since this model gives the lowest value of SIC, I will proceed with this GARS 11M VAR model to study the impact of temperature on US macroeconomy. There is another reason why GAR's 1-1 MBAR model is better fitted, which I will explain in a while. So this table 2 is the estimation of equation 2 from the previous slide. So there are different types of, for instance, we do have industrial production index, we do have total employment, we do have total private employment, we do have employment in recreational sector, we do have employment in manufacturing sector. So every time I need to estimate the model, I want to see the impact of temperature on different component of economy. So firstly, I conducted the analysis with temperature and industrial production index. After that, I repeated the analysis with temperature and total employment. And after that, I repeated the analysis with temperature and total private employment. And the estimation result is shown in table 2. Here, the coefficient, which is the unconditional variance, they are all constant. And here, the coefficient of epsilon t minus 1 squared. So this shows the impact of previous shocks on temperature and macroeconomic variables on present variance. They all are persistent and significant. And in the fourth column, we have AT minus 1. This shows the impact of first lag variance on the previous variance on present variance, and this is also significant across all the model. So this is one of the reasons why this GAR's 1-1 MBAR model is better fitted for this analysis compared to VAR model. Since the coefficient of this epsilon t minus 1 squared and AT minus 1, they are all significant in every model. So this GAR's 1-1 model is better fitted. And numbers in parentheses represent standard error. The standard errors are low in every model that I have included. Now the main the goal of this paper is to study the impact of temperature volatility, which is the effect which in the model I want to estimate the impact of B21, which I showed you in the previous slide. After estimating, I got the value in the software called as RATS, and the value of B21 is listed in table 4. Here, the dependent variable are macroeconomic variables, and independent variable is temperature volatility. Now let's see how temperature volatility is affecting each macroeconomic variable. So let's first talk about industrial production index. My analysis shows that the impact of temperature volatility on industrial production index is not significant. The number in parentheses is a standard error. The same with total employment. The temperature volatility does not appear to have significant impact on total employment. However, in the case of private sector employment, temperature volatility, which is a channel of temperature propagation, seems to have positive impact on private sector employment. And my analysis suggests that with 1 degree increase in temperature, the private sector employment increases by 0.38%. While in the case of manufacturing employment, temperature volatility seems to have negative impact on manufacturing employment. With 1 degree increase in temperature, manufacturing employment tends to decrease by 0.6%. And construction employment seems to be positively impacted by temperature volatility. With 1 degree increase in temperature, construction employment tends to increase by 1.16%. While in the case of leisure employment and transportation employment and agriculture employment, surprisingly, agriculture employment does not seem to be affected by temperature volatility. In case of transportation employment, temperature volatility seems to have significant negative impact. In the case of leisure employment, temperature does not have significant impact. All the figures inside parentheses, they are standard error. Now, let's talk about the impulse response function, the dynamics of output following temperature shock. Here you can see two pictures. In the first panel, you can see the impact of positive temperature shock on output, and on the left side picture, you can see the negative temperature shock. So here, the impulse response function shows that with the increase in temperature, the GDP remains insignificant, which agrees with what I found on the table. And with the decrease in temperature, there has been a lot of saying that if we decrease the temperature, then we might have good things coming over. But my analysis suggests that if the temperature decreases, then it may not have the same impact or significant impact. And this shows, this impulse response shows what will happen to the impact if we ignore the guards term in the model. Here in this picture, you can see that the dark line is the model without the guards term, while the blue line is the analysis with the guards model. So this picture shows that if we include the guards model, then the effects of temperature shocks on macroeconomic variable is amplified. So this would give us, this suggests that temperature might affect the economy through temperature, through the volatility channel. Although it is not significant, but volatility in temperature might be one channel through which temperature affects the economy. And this is the dynamics of employment following temperature shocks. Just like in the case of previous GDP case, this is also not significant, and this appears to be symmetric. And in the case of employment, the guards model does not appear to amplify the impact of unemployment. does not seem to amplify the impact of temperature on employment. So I'm done a little bit early. So far, the conclusion of my paper as of now is temperature volatility has insignificant impacts on industrial production index and total employment. However, employment in private manufacturing, construction, and transportation sector seem to be affected by temperature volatility significantly. So in the case of manufacturing, construction, and transportation sector, volatility might be one channel through which climate variables like temperature might propagate to the US economy. Temperature shocks seem to have insignificant but symmetric impacts on industrial production index and in employment, which is concluded from the fact that impact of negative and positive shocks of temperature shocks might have equal negative and positive impact on macroeconomic variables. So the limitations of the study is that there are only two variables in this study. One was temperature, another was macroeconomic variable. So although I explained little bit, explained the impact of temperature on different sector, but in doing that, I needed to run the model every time. So the limitation is bivariate. It would have been better if this model was multivariate. And another is causality could run from economic variables to temperature as well. As I said that I consider that B21 to be equal to 0. That means the impact on macroeconomic variable would not have contemporaneous effect on temperature, but it could have. So that is also limitation of the study. So I'm currently working on this multivariate model, which could address the potential causality issue running from macroeconomic variables to temperature, for which if any of you are interested, then collaboration is mostly welcomed. So this is my present work. Sorry, I could not continue talking because I think I got COVID and I have been sleeping for a whole 1 or 2 weeks. So if any of you have any question, then I would be happy to respond.
So let me quickly jump over. Thank you so much, Dr. Niraj Koirala, especially given you're recovering from COVID, but you still took some time to present today. So first of all, thank you very much. And second, before I pass to Apekshya, people might be wondering, well, this is not really a study related to Nepal, but please bear in mind that the topic is so much relevant to us because it's about climate volatility and macroeconomic impact. So it's very much relevant to what you were seeing here. So over to you, Apekshya, for some comments on Dr. Koirala's presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, loud and clear, Apekshya. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you to Dr. Koirala for sharing his work with us today and to everyone else for joining us. The presentation already covered the research project in a lot of detail, so I'll keep my comments short. I'll start with a brief summary of the paper, followed by some comments on the implications of the paper's findings and potential avenues for further developing this research agenda. At the most general level, the paper engages with the relationship between climate and the economy and examines whether and how temperature affects macroeconomic indicators. Specifically, it estimates the effect of temperature volatility on the US economy. The paper is situated in the broader quantitative economics literature that engages with questions related to climate's effect on various dimensions of the economy. It appears to be especially in conversation with earlier scholarship that has established a negative relationship between rising temperatures and economic growth, particularly in the case of poor economies. The paper contributes to this literature by assessing how temperature affects macroeconomic variables in the context of an advanced industrial economy, the United States. Specifically, it examines how temperature affects industrial production as well as total and sectoral employment in the US. To do so, the paper relies on data on temperature and economic variables from various sources covering a period of 82 years from 1939 to 2021. In a nutshell, the paper finds that temperature volatility has an insignificant impact on industrial production and total employment. However, it finds that temperature volatility significantly affects employment in specific sectors of the economy, including manufacturing, construction, transportation, and the private sector. Lastly, it also finds that the effect of temperature shocks on industrial production and employment are insignificant. Although the findings of the paper make important contributions to the literature, the findings must be interpreted while keeping in mind the limitations of currently used methods to establish the direction of causality. As noted by Dr. Koirala himself, at this point, it is difficult to disentangle the noted effects of temperature on economic indicators from the potential effects of economic variables on temperature. In addition to engaging with questions around causality, the further iterations of the paper would be strengthened by a more elaborate discussion of the specific mechanism or mechanisms that may explain this observed relationship between temperature and economic indicators. This would be particularly pertinent in helping us understand why temperature volatility affects different sectors of the economy differently. It would also help clarify the kinds of socioeconomic contexts where we would expect this relationship to hold. For instance, in rich countries versus poor countries, socialist versus capitalist economies, places with strong labor laws versus places without them, etc. It could also shed light on whether these findings are consistent with or challenge earlier findings from less economically developed contexts. Lastly, the paper's findings on the relationship between temperature and macroeconomic indicators also has important policy implications. It is especially relevant when we think about how changing temperatures may affect employment, which would directly affect income inequality and rates of poverty. It also further reinforces that policymakers need to develop more targeted climate policies that take into account the various ways in which temperature may or may not affect specific economic variables and sectors in the economy. Finally, the paper's findings on temperature's conditional effects on employment can also help inform policy discussions around how climate change may influence patterns of employment, migration, and other related sociopolitical processes. With that, I'll close my comments and I look forward to questions and comments from the audience.
Thank you, Apekshya, for your feedback.
So would you want to take some questions now, Dr. Koirala?
Yeah. Yeah, I got a question from Buddhi
Please go ahead.
Gamaliji.
Yeah.
Thank you for your question. So it depends upon the frequency of the data. In the case of quality of life index, I don't know whether we
Dr.
have
Koirala,
that much data.
Dr. Koirala, sorry to interrupt. Could you first read the question if you don't mind, so that our listeners, understand what the question is. Thank you.
Buddhi Gamaliji asks whether the model helps estimates the relationship between temperature, volatility, and quality of life index at different geographic regions in Nepal. Whether the model can be used to estimate the relationship between those two variables, he asks. So in order to use this model, all those two variables need to follow arch process. Those two variables need to form some sort of clustering. So here I can show you here. Just give me a second. Here you can see that these two temperature growth and GDP growth. You can see that this GDP growth forms some sort of cluster, right? The same with temperature growth. So in order to use this Gartz and Var model, the data needs to show some sort of clustering behavior. I'm not sure whether the quality of life in Nepal follows that arc process. And I'm not sure whether we do have monthly data available for that. And if the data is available from month to month basis, then probably it is better to test first for arch process. And if the data passes that arch test, then you need to test skewness and kurtosis test. And after that, you need to do ADF and those things. And only after that, you need to go over SIC criteria. And after doing these 4 or 5 layer of test, you can do this. You can analyze, estimate this model.
Dr. Koirala, just a quick follow-up question. There's so much climate volatility here in Nepal. So I was just wondering if you've started any, effort in collecting and gathering data while you've been here, because you've been here for a few months. So have you started any effort in gathering such type of data so that you can probably replicate, something similar that you've done?
In case of Nepal?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, in case of Nepal, what I did is that I got the data from central bank, and I'm estimating some data retrospectively. So although it is very difficult to get the data for Nepal, but one way is to first collect the data available from the central bank or from World Bank, and to use principal component analysis and forecast retrospectively. That's what I am doing, so that I can use in the paper to be written after I go to US.
Well, thank you. We have another question from Dr. Bora, actually.
Yeah.
He's asking, did you add
Dr.
any
Alok
lags?
Bora asked, did you add any
Yes.
lags of the macro variables on the right-hand side? And I mean dependent variable. Here the dependent variables are temperature and macroeconomic variables. According to John Hamilton, we need to use 12 lags since the data are monthly in frequency. So I use 12 lag to avoid the endogeneity problem. This yeah.
Anyone else, please feel free to raise your hand. No questions, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe the presentation might have been a little technical to a few of our members today, but nevertheless, it was a great presentation. And I'm particularly impressed with the detail, the empirical specification that you've used, Dr. Koirala, and hopefully you can replicate something similar. Because again, like I've mentioned, this is such an important topic for us, not just to Nepal,
Yeah.
but just to other regions, other countries here in the region. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't have any questions, then maybe it's better to let Dr. Koirala go because he's recovering from COVID. Once again, Dr. Niraj Koirala, thank you so much for your presentation today. On behalf of the IIDS, I would not only like to thank you, but also like to wish you the best for your new job. And likewise, Apekshya Prasai, thank you very much for being the discussant today. All the best with your remaining year, with your remaining research work. Hopefully, we'll have you present your wonderful field study very soon. So thank you so much once again. And both of you safe travels back to the US. So ladies and gentlemen, let's give them a big applause. And thank you and see you in September.
Thank you, Prabin, for inviting me.